Welcome to the show, Solar Works for Illinois. I'm Tim Montague. Today is July 30th, and today we're breaking down the Illinois RPS, the path to 100% wind and solar with Kevin Borgia of Cypress Creek Renewables. Kevin is an experienced advocate for renewable energy at both the state and federal level. He's actually been a legislative and regulatory affairs specialist for over 10 years. He's been with Cypress Creek since 2017 when they really entered the Illinois market, when FEJA was just cooking, and he was instrumental in getting FEJA on the books. So we're grateful for all the work that Kevin does. He's also a board member of ISEA, the Illinois Solar Energy Industry Association. And welcome to the show, Kevin. It's so good to have you here.
Absolutely. Hey, Tim. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
We are going to do a deep dive into the RPS situation in Illinois, but first I wanted you to just briefly introduce yourself. How did you get into renewable energy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in renewable energy, whether wind or solar, for about 14 years. My background is actually in journalism. I was a trade reporter for a publication called Inside EPA and a sister publication called Energy Washington. In DC for many years, and my beat was renewable energy policy. So I did that for a few years, kind of burned out on DC, and when I moved back to Chicago, I had some connections in the industry and looked around, and there was no, at that time, wind industry trade association. And so with some connections that I had, myself and a partner founded the Illinois Wind Energy Association and came to represent many of the largest wind energy developers in the world. And we ran that for a few years before merging into a larger organization called Wind on the Wires, which is now known as the Clean Grid Alliance. Worked on FEJA, worked on a number of other clean energy permitting and taxation bills in Springfield and regulations with the IPA and a number of other things over the years. And then made the jump over to Cypress Creek about 2.5 years ago now. And I've been working heavily on implementing FEJA and making sure that renewables are able to grow in Illinois, which is my home state, and been excited to be a part of it.
Great. So what FEJA did is it laid the groundwork for getting back on track with our 25% renewable portfolio standard, 25% by 2025. And my understanding is that fuels about $200 million of incentives into the marketplace for both wind and solar. We're adding 2,800 megawatts of solar, 1,000 megawatts of wind. And lo and behold, about 6 months ago, we realized that the funding mechanism of FEJA was not going to get us to that 25% goal, and new initiatives were kicked off or were maybe already in the works, which you've been heavily involved with. One of those is the Path to 100, so we'd like to break that down and get a status report. But 25, 40%, 100%, that is the path that I see to 100% wind and solar. It's totally technically feasible, and many other states now, California, New Jersey, Hawaii, New Mexico, many states have developed 100% RPSs. So what's your take on the RPS generally, and what is the path forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a couple of great points there, that we see a bunch of other states moving forward to 100% renewable energy, most recently New York, which in a lot of ways shares a lot of similarities from a market perspective with Illinois. And we saw the bill that just went through. It has a broader decarbonization goal as well. It's very comprehensive, and actually my colleagues at Cypress Creek are heavily involved in that as well. We're seeing this tremendous shift that I think a lot of us didn't think was possible, 10, 15 years ago. It's just the costs have come down so much. Both wind technology, solar technology, the technical expertise of integrating and interconnecting that, those levels of penetration. We've really just done amazing things over the past 10 years, right? Brilliant engineers, have really been able to help make this kind of stuff happen. And so, Illinois is a reflection of that, right? We passed the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA, as you said, in 2016. And there's been a lot of growth coming out of that. I think the numbers actually that you quoted are low. I think one interesting thing about the experience we've had under FEJA is that typically on the utility scale, wind and solar side, the costs are far lower than we even expected. And so the IPA has actually gone further than the specific new build requirements in the legislation and have procured, I believe, more megawatts, significantly so, of utility scale renewables than were even mandated specifically. So we're seeing that kind of growth happen.
If it's not 2,800, what is that number now in your mind?
I'm not sure, but it's beyond that because of the way that the ICC directed IPA to do more utility scale procurements instead of just spot rec procurements. So we're seeing a greater growth. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's definitely larger than we're going to see, larger than the 2,800 megawatts of solar.
Just so people understand, in FEJA, it really designates recs, not megawatts. And so
right.
That's one of the challenges is they're really all about putting recs in the marketplace. So one rec is 1 megawatt hour of electricity and from renewable sources, wind and solar primarily. But so we have this goal of a 25% RPS. It was broken for years, just kind of limping along. We did see substantial wind growth in the last 10 years. Since I moved to Central Illinois, it's really exploded here in Central Illinois. And now we have a good spurt of growth going on in utility and community solar and DG, right? We've got those 666 megawatts of RECs in the market. Those projects are getting constructed or planned for construction. And then several other 100 megawatts of utility scale solar. Why is the path needed, and the path to 100, and what exactly is the status of the path? And then I will put up the splash page for that website also, so our listeners can go there and take action, because that is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the Path to 100 bill, which is some legislation that was introduced earlier this year by Representative Will Davis and Representative Senator Bill Cunningham, introduced the Path to 100 legislation, which seeks to expand the RPS. Right, FEJA fixed, like you mentioned, those riddlesome technical challenges that were in the RPS before. FEJA fixed those, but it didn't go far enough. And what we need to do now, especially as we're seeing there you go. There's the splash page for the Path to 100. We're seeing an increased need to go further. And so what the Path to 100 does is it has a couple of key, it has a lot of detail in there, but I think among the key components is that it expands the renewable energy mandate to 40% by 2030. We need to go higher. And again, it's the path to 100. I mean, I think that the long-term goal there is to get to 100% renewable energy. Because like you said, that is feasible with existing technology, and as utilities get more comfortable with the technology, we're able to move that forward. We also work to increase the cost cap with the Path to 100 bill, ensure that there's enough money to provide the kind of growth that we need to see and that we want to see to address climate change in Illinois. And there's a number of programmatic reforms about how the program is rolled out, how it's managed, things like that. There are provisions related to interconnection and how to make the interconnection process more smooth and transparent. And then there's some provisions on jobs and hiring. We need to make sure that we're creating equity and creating diversity in the workforce in the solar and wind industry. And there are some provisions in there that specifically do that. So those are the key things that we're looking to achieve with the Path to 100 bill. And as you put it up there, the Path to 100 Coalition, which is a group of industry members that have come together to really advocate for this bill in part of the broader energy debate in Springfield. We put this together because we think that there is a real need to get the industry involved. If you look at what is happening right here, we have enough funding in the existing program to build the 600 megawatts that you mentioned, right, as well as some utility scale megawatts. But after after this kind of first initial sugar rush happens of growth, we're going to start to see trailing off in job growth, and we're going to probably see some layoffs. And That's obviously not the kind of industry that anyone wants to see. That's not in the interest of the industry. It's not in the interests of landowners, ratepayers, folks that are going to be building projects. And so we want to make sure that the long-term benefit of clean energy it continues to come to Illinois, and we don't see that cliff.
Indeed. The cliff is very real and very dangerous. So you see here that basically the REC money, because we're paying out 15 years of RECs on projects in the first 5 years, that's how the program works, at least for DG. That means that that money is getting spent in kind of an accelerated fashion. And so the $200 million is inadequate. We need to, well, the Path 100, I think, will, for all intents and purposes, double that. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, at least. We seek to see that amount increase. And I think it's also important to note that, it's not the point of these kind of renewable energy investments and these laws that are out there. It's not about a cost. It's not about a sink to ratepayers. It's about an investment in the broader future and about the broader kind of electric stability of the state of Illinois. And so, I mean, when we look at the requirements that are in the law, and we talked about this a little before, it's about the broader ratepayer benefit, right? Because ratepayers benefit from renewable energy in a variety of ways. Primarily that once the projects are built, we build a bunch of wind, we build a bunch of solar, the costs are known, those costs get amortized over several years by the private sector, and then the fuel is free, as we know. So we end up keeping the cost low in the out years. We're not subject to that commodities risk that comes from using fossil fuel resources, and we're not subject to potential environmental regulations that come down the pike that can help to raise those prices. Of course, we see solar shaving peaks, during hot summer days especially, which means less costly peaker plants need to be in the mix. That's reducing ratepayer costs. Wind has similar price suppression benefits too that we've seen specifically in Northern Illinois. We've seen in the off-peak times, we've seen wind really push down the wholesale market prices. And there's actually an IPA study from back in, I think, 2011, 2012, that showed that just the amount of renewables we had on the system then, which is, I don't know, probably less than half of where we are today, reduced wholesale market prices by about $177 million. And that same dynamic continues to specific number off the top of my head. But we think that is some of the real benefit that comes from renewables. And then, of course, we haven't even talked about reducing the externalities from pollution, right? I mean, the reason that we're building renewables is because it's healthier for all of us, and it's healthier for the planet, and we're addressing climate change. And a simplistic analysis of power prices doesn't often capture those externalities. And so, we're able through the Path to 100 bill to ensure that we're reducing those prices and providing those benefits to ratepayers in addition to all the other jobs. But the last thing I'll say on this is that we do have a safety valve in there to make sure that no matter what, those upfront costs of building renewables are not going to increase the cost more than about $1.77 per month for the average ratepayer in Illinois, and so over existing law. And so we think that is a real protection that's going to allow the kind of growth and the kind of benefit that we need without leaving ratepayers exposed to potential increase.
Let's talk a little more about the major benefits of this legislation, whether it's FEJA or the Path to 100, jobs, the environment, and ratepayers, and then just a little more about the grid. You can think of the grid as a gigantic machine. It's powered by things like coal burning power plants, natural gas burning power plants, nuclear power plants, and now wind and solar power plants. And the goal is to have a resilient, reliable, safe, and healthy grid. And now that renewables are cost competitive, and we see this not only across the US, but across the globe, where even renewables are replacing peaker plants. So wind, solar, and storage is being used to replace gas peaker plants. Of course, coal power plants are being shuttered in droves, and that's just pure economics. You know, NIPSCO announced they're going to shutter their coal fleet in Indiana in the next 10 years because of the economics. It's not because they necessarily want to green the environment or green the grid. They just want to make money and do that in an efficient manner. So
Yep.
what does the renewables industry in Illinois spell out for jobs and the environment?
Sure, absolutely. So specifically, the Path to 100 bill, which is one of many proposals out there to expand clean energy in the state, would work to, again, see the kind of growth that we talked about earlier. But under the projections that we have, getting to 40%, we'd create about 21,000 new jobs. That's about $2.8 billion in new property taxes for landowners that lease their land, generally farmers, but others too, that can lease their land to new wind and solar projects, providing almost $2 billion in landowner payments to those individuals. And I apologize, I misspoke there. $2.8 billion in new property taxes and $1.95 billion in landowner payments over the 20 years. So, excuse me about that. So again, significant economic benefit to the state, as well as now the past experience going back to FEJA, like you mentioned. We've seen already just in the past year, according to I believe the Solar Foundation, 1,300 new jobs get added in Illinois just in solar, which is pretty fantastic. Overall, in Illinois, we have over 14,000 people employed in wind and solar, which is pretty significant. That's a lot more, by the way, than are employed by coal, which I think is a pretty stark reality in Illinois, in that we have a long history of coal in Illinois. But at this point, mechanization has really reduced the workforce. We're still mining significant amounts of coal in Illinois that's being exported to other states and other countries. But we're doing it with just a fraction of the workers that we used to. And so now at this point, renewables are providing more jobs than coal does. I think that's always an interesting thing that gets lost in the broader political debate. And so as this kind of growth happens, to your point about one big machine, I think that's the perfect way to describe the grid, especially the way that PJM is run in Northern Illinois, but also MISO in the southern parts of the state. Just because you have renewable energy on the grid, it's not going to be sunny at every point. It's obviously not going to produce solar at night, but what you have is a dynamic grid where there's going to be parts of the grid where the sun is shining at different parts of the day, and then same thing with wind. There's maybe not on all points of PJM is every wind farm producing at a high capacity factor, but somewhere on PJM it is. And the way the electric grid works is one large machine. PJM can manage that demand and move electricity around with a robust transmission grid in ways that allow them to balance the load and always meet that demand in a reliable way. And utilities and PJM and RTOs in general are getting better and better at this. And so obviously we've got great solar production during the day. Wind in the Midwest produces heavily at night. And then you can, working with utilities and grid operators, help to balance out those shoulder hours too. And so, what we're seeing is really a fundamental shift in the technological capabilities of the industry, of utilities, and it can really help us to achieve the goals of the Path to 100 bill. Because like you said, coal, the economics of coal are just not there anymore. And, as coal plants ramp down, we're seeing this in Illinois and other states, we're starting to see renewables come up to fill the gap.
We can't expect the grid to just stay the same. And ironically, it is largely the same machinery as it was 100 years ago. But what happens if we fail to expand the RPS? Yeah,
absolutely. So, the first thing that I think we see, like we talked about earlier, is that loss of jobs. We're going to see all these great things, the 1,300 jobs that we've seen over the past year in Illinois. We're going to see some of those go away. We're going to see some layoffs that unfortunately happen, and we're not going to have that kind of continued construction that I think we all want to see. But more importantly, I think we forget about this because the impact isn't directly in front of us. It means that we continue to contribute to climate change by burning fossil fuels. And any increase that we can have, whether it's 25%, 40%, 100%, is going to have a material impact on our environment. We're going to have cleaner air. In addition to all the economic reasons that I described, we're also going to have cleaner air and far less contribution to climate change. And I think that we often don't think about this in the broader context, but Illinois is approximately the world's 20th largest economy, if it were its own country, in terms of GDP. And so moving to clean energy is a big shift with global ramifications. And obviously, the higher the energy percentage, the higher the impact. And so, when we think about things in that global context, it really does become a kind of think globally, act locally kind of a thing. And that's really what Path 100 is all about.
And how do the utilities view the RPS and these new initiatives like the Path 100 to expand the RPS? And when I say utilities, I'm referring mostly to the investor-owned utilities. In Illinois, we have ComEd, Ameren, and what is the third?
Mid-American. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ComEd and Ameren are the vast majority of the load in Illinois. And we've had our differences, I think, as an industry with ComEd, and Ameren, but they're implementing the law fairly and effectively in ways that we don't necessarily see in other markets. I'm not going to name any names, but there are certainly some utilities that are quite recalcitrant to adopting renewables, or quite resistant to adopting renewables that don't directly benefit their bottom line. And so, again, I'm not to say that there aren't differences, but our utilities have been implementing the law in ways that are going to allow renewables to grow. There's always ways to improve, and there's those ongoing discussions happen, both with the companies and the utilities directly, as well as with lawmakers. But we see our utilities moving to interconnect higher percentages of renewables because they understand that it can benefit their ratepayers and benefit their own bottom lines if it's done the right way.
How has that played out for Cypress Creek in particular in terms of interconnection? When you build a solar facility, you have to get permission from the utility to interconnect it to the grid. And especially if you're talking small utility like community solar or utility scale, that can have an impact on that infrastructure. So it's taken very seriously. But how has that process been for Cypress Creek and other developers?
Sure. So I don't want to speak for others. I think in terms of Cypress Creek, we've been working with both utilities to interconnect a large number of projects. Cypress Creek came out of the Illinois Power Agency's lottery, and this is public data. We won 17 community solar projects, and we've been moving forward to interconnect those over the past couple of months since the IPA's lottery. And we've been working with the utilities, and it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Oftentimes there are questions and disputes about the costs of certain pieces of equipment and other aspects of the interconnect. And in other cases, we're able to move things forward in a fair and effective way. I mean, I think one of the key things that's vital for a functioning renewable energy market is that there be a fair and transparent interconnection process. And Illinois' interconnection process for solar was created a couple of years ago, really before the dynamics of FEJA came into existence. And that system doesn't necessarily reflect the realities of where the industry is today. And so there is some provisions in the Path 100 bill that would seek to reform how the interconnection process works and ensure that kind of transparency that we really need to see so that we can have the kind of growth that we want to achieve with the bill.
I certainly heard a lot of grumbling from developers about the interconnection costs, especially in Northern Illinois. Most of the developers developing community solar projects are coming from the East Coast or the West Coast or the Southwest. And so they've been there, done that, and they know what to anticipate. And they were caught off guard. And of course, that is one way that the IOUs can push back on wind and solar is they can make it expensive, or they can make it slow and somewhat treacherous. So we definitely want better interconnection policies that just make it easier for the industry. Wind and solar are here to stay, and there's nothing stopping those in these industries, the influx of affordable technology and huge amounts of investor dollars into the renewables industries is driving change. It's a tidal force, and so it really is going to behoove everyone involved if we can get a smoother, fairer process.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we can't have a system that prevents solar and wind as well, although most wind is connected at the RTO level, which is a whole other ball of challenges, by the way. But we have to have a system that is able to interconnect these penetrations of solar that we want to see. And I think like some of the experience that we saw over the past few years of high costs and other things, to some degree was a function of the program design itself under the RPS. I mean, we had a lottery instated that the whole notion of a lottery was the only way to increase your market share in Illinois was not to develop the best projects or the lowest cost projects or the first projects. It was develop the most projects, right? That was the way. It was just became a numbers game. And when it becomes a numbers game, you have interconnection queues and feeders that end up with 27 projects on it, right? And if you are project number 24 of 27 on a feeder, your interconnection costs, first of all, are going to be inaccurate at the outset, because not all 22 projects ahead of you are going to actually get interconnected. And so as a result of that, though, you might end up with very, very high costs, or the utility, because of the way the interconnection system works, says, well, this substation is at capacity, so you're not going to rebuild the substation. So what we're going to do is we're going to drive a different feeder line 12 miles to a different substation, right? You pay for every foot that wire, and obviously that can start to increase costs too. And so we ended up with a combination under the policy structure that was in place in the lottery that led to kind of some certainly high cost, as well as just some unrealistic interconnection procedures. And so over time, in the next version of the program, hopefully we'll have a different kind of a selection process, and hopefully we won't see some of those unfortunate kind of interconnection costs.
So of the 17 projects that you were awarded, or that CCR was awarded RECs on, will all of those get built?
That's our intention. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Cypress Creek develops high quality projects. We're very good at developing large numbers of kind of mid-scale projects, like in the Illinois Community Solar Program. We're very good with our site diligence and that kind of development work. So yeah, we fully intend to build our full portfolio of projects in the state, and hopefully continue that growth going forward.
So now everyone is waiting with bated breath that phase one of the program, is complete for all intents and purposes. We have a big chunk of RECs in the market, and developers are busy, finalizing their permitting and getting under construction. But there's many more RECs to be had in theory. And what are the challenges or the opportunities and challenges for the program as it gets rolled out in the second phase?
Yeah. I mean, I think I already said it, and this is probably no surprise to anyone that's probably watching this podcast or webcast, but not a lottery is probably the best thing that can ensure a more functional program in the second phase. The lottery was chosen because it was kind of the least bad option that was floated during the development of the first phase, the adjustable block program. But like I said, the lottery ended up causing a lot of problems and added significant uncertainty and risk to the industry, and that's really not good for any business. And so, what comes next, I don't really know specifically. I have some different thoughts. Certainly, I think that some kind of merit-based system can really ensure that there's a more fair and successful program that moves forward. And what that looks like, it remains to be seen. I mean, we're still at the point where we're looking at legislation and then a rulemaking, and IPA is going to manage all of that. And I think that they did a great job the first time around. But we'll begin the process all over again. That one way to reduce uncertainty and get the highest quality projects is really come up with something that's not based on random chance, that's for sure.
We have some questions from our audience about lithium-ion batteries. Are there recs or incentives in the Path 100 legislation or other legislation that's coming that will incentivize the advent of more storage in Illinois?
So yeah, under current law, there's nothing that specifically incentivizes storage. In the Path 100 bill, we look at a study on storage to try to figure out what the best ways are to roll out and expand storage. I think that there are some other proposals that are out there. Like I mentioned, Path 100 is one of multiple pieces of legislation that was introduced this spring session. Our allies in the environmental community introduced a bill that they call the Clean Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA. Their bill has some other policy prescriptions that can enhance storage and move that forward. I don't claim to be an expert on the electric storage. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that the cost of that and the technology is growing at an unbelievable rate. And so, that's certainly going to be part of the mix. But under current law, there's nothing that specifically incentivizes that. But that's something that I think the legislature will hopefully tackle over the next couple of months here.
We are doing a small number of behind-the-meter battery projects. And, when you pair solar and storage, you can take the ITC, the investment tax credit on that storage asset. But unless you're a manufacturer, that's trying to avoid outages or brownouts or something like that, that gives you a significant benefit. We don't have large-scale battery adoption in Illinois, and part of that has to do with demand charges. Also, demand charges need to be around $14 in order to really make storage pencil. So, stay tuned on that. And those are good questions, but it's just an unknown. When we will get some more storage-friendly legislation. We are going to wrap up here at 12:40 so that Kevin can get on to another meeting. But a couple other questions here for you, Kevin. What is being done to ensure geographic distribution of solar across Illinois?
Yeah, a great point. I think that the first version of the program was successful in distributing renewables across the state. We've got a significant amount of growth that's happened. Vote Solar did some great info on this. I think it's over 50 counties are getting either a community solar project or a commercial industrial project. And again, don't quote me on that exact number, but it's over 50, which is about half of Illinois counties. A lot of that are rural for community solar, especially. So that's great. So we're seeing a diversity geographically just across the whole state, which I think is fantastic. What we haven't seen in Illinois, though, is growth in community solar in more urban areas. We've seen residential solar, we've seen commercial industrial installations, but we haven't seen as much of that in urban areas. And so, I think that one of the things that'll be part of the Path 100 kind of legislative negotiations that happen is we'll see some additional incentives that can bring more into urban areas. Of course, there are some challenges with that, right? I mean, when you seek the cheapest land, you're going to not find that in a more developed area, right? So there are greater challenges to building in urban areas that's more costly. There's less available land. It's harder to find that 10 to 15 acres to do a 2 megawatt project, right? And then, of course, you have greater permitting. Building in a rural greenfield is going to be an easier permit to get than something in a more urban area, something perhaps on a brownfield. So, that's one thing that can work to make sure that we're kind of growing renewables across the state in our urban and rural areas. I do think that one thing that we can do, one thing that's already an inherent benefit of the existing community solar program is that there are not proximity requirements for where your subscribers can come from for community solar. So it doesn't matter if a project is located on the far western edge of ComEd's grid near the Mississippi River. A individual who is located in the city of Chicago can subscribe to that project. And so, what that does is that allows that person who's located far, far from the project site to benefit from the real benefits of community solar, which is lower prices. And so that's a bigger impact, I think, on that individual, myself, who lives in the city of Chicago, than having community solar project in my neighborhood. Now, granted, it's a great symbol to have in your neighborhood that you've got a community solar project, but in terms of the direct economic benefit, Illinois' program is actually already well set up and well established to ensure that these benefits are broadly distributed across the state.
And what about economic distribution among disadvantaged groups? How are we guaranteeing that not only that low-income groups benefit from FEJA, but that the workforce is more diverse?
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. That's key, right? I mean, I think in FEJA, we established the Solar for All program, which specifically ensures that the benefits of solar are not restricted, right? And that low-income individuals, people from disadvantaged and economic justice communities are able to take advantage of the benefits of solar. One thing that we learned in this current implementation of that program, that wasn't big enough. The Path to 100 bill expands funding for that by 5x, which I think is significant. But it doesn't stop there. I mean, there are ways that we need to work to make sure that the workforce for all solar is more diverse. And that's something that I think Representative Davis specifically has made a key priority in that he wants to see that is implemented in a fair way. And I agree with that. I mean, I think we need to find ways to increase that diversity in ways that work with the realities of the industry and where projects are being built and et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there are a variety of ways to do that. Someone actually told me that the recently passed marijuana legalization in Illinois has some great incentives. It might be a good model. And so I think a lot of folks have been looking at that. We need to make sure that, again, this is a diverse workforce and that the benefits are as broad-based as possible.
But when you think about the number of community solar projects, there's 100 of them that have won RECs, and the fact that those are coming to 50 different counties, that's pretty good diversity geographically.
Yeah,
it is going to be a challenge for always to break into urban settings with these. A community solar array could take 10 to 20 acres, so you don't necessarily have that. Although there are some brownfields that are being looked at in inner city Chicago. I know Amoresco is developing some brownfields with 1 megawatt community solar projects in the city of Chicago. So
yeah, and you could end up with some stuff that's a little bit smaller sites too. That's definitely a benefit as well.
I want to point out that we have some great guests coming up on Solar Works for Illinois this late summer, early fall. In September, on September 17th, we have Jonathan Roberts, who's Vice President of Development in the Midwest for Soltage, a developer from New York. And then in October, and maybe we can touch on this briefly, Kevin, we have Rob Davis, Director of the Center for Pollinators in Energy at Fresh Energy up in Minnesota. We're going to talk about pollinator and wildlife-friendly solar farms in the Midwest. What can be done to make solar farms more environmentally friendly?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. And I look forward to your conversation with Rob Davis. I'm a big Rob Davis fan. He's got a great TED Talk that's really enthralling, I think. To your point, like, how can we make sure that it's environmentally friendly? And I think that solar is all about, well, I'll say it this way. We all got into this business because we care about the environment, and we care about the broader kind of ecology of where we live, right? And, part of building solar can ensure that land is treated as well as possible. And so the key thing that can be done, and Cypress Creek has been heavily involved in this, is that we work with native plants. We plant native plants, ground cover on the site. We're not using gravel more than we have to for access roads and things. We're planting native plants, and with that, you can ensure better drainage. You're getting better aeration of the soil. As part of that, you're getting better organic matter in the soil, less runoff. And then, of course, during the life of the program, we're not going to be dumping fertilizer into that prime farmland. We're not going to be contributing to that dead zone that exists in the Gulf. And I think that that's one of the ways that the Illinois RPS can specifically have bigger impacts than we think about, right? Because it's all global impact. And so, Illinois is a major contributor to that dead zone through the use of fertilizers, and we can ensure by using less, just a tiny bit with solar, right? I mean, solar's not going to take up that much farmland, but it's just that much less fertilizer that's dumped in the soil. And so at the end of the project life, we're going to pull up the stakes. We're not, as you know, we're not using a lot of concrete on our projects in Illinois. And we're going to leave the land better than we found it. And I think that that's a real benefit of solar. It often gets neglected. And that's before you even start to talk about other things that you can have on the site, like pollinating. You can have beehives, you can have other things. That is of special importance because pollinating habitat is hard to find. There's not a lot of other opportunities like that. It's especially important in some of our more diverse agricultural economies like Michigan. And so Cypress Creek has done a lot of great work on the pollinator side. We try to do that whenever possible. And I actually have here, this is some solar honey from a Cypress Creek project that we put together in Minnesota. And we can generate honey on sites as well while we're doing solar. And so I think that that's just one example of how solar can really work to be as environmentally friendly as possible.
That's awesome. Solar honey. And I just want to point out that we have created a working group here at Continental with a group of environmental engineers and ecologists and developers to up our game industry-wide on pollinator-friendly and wildlife-friendly solar. So check that out at seco.com/pollinators, and please do join us in October for the Rob Davis event. That's going to be very insightful. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. We are all out of time, unfortunately, and all of our participants can simply email me if you have additional questions. I'm happy to answer them, and if I can't, I'll get those to Kevin, who is our policy expert at ICEA and Cypress Creek Renewables. Thank you so much, Kevin, and thanks everybody for joining us today.